Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We have two superb poets with us today, Laure-Anne Bosselaar and Bart Edelman. Laure-Anne will read first and then Bart. Laure-Anne Bosselaar is the author of The Hour Between Dog and Wolf, Small Gods of Grief, winner of the Isabella Gardner Prize, and of A New Hunger, selected as a notable book by the ALA, and These Many Rooms was published by Four Way Books. She taught at Emerson College, Sarah Lawrence College, and UCSB, the recipient of a Pushcart Prize and of the James Dickey Poetry Prize. She edited 5 anthologies and served as Santa Barbara's Poet Laureate from 2019 to 2021. Lately, her New and Selected will come out in November 2023 from Sungold Press. Laure-Anne has joy, vitality, love, sagaciousness, and a superlative use of language in her poetry. Here's a wonderful poet, Laure-Anne Bosselaar.
Harry, thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you very much for inviting me again and again with Bart Edelman, because I love his work and I love to read with him. We just, what is it called? Mesh well together, I guess. So thank you. This reading is, I decided to write, okay, let me make a parenthesis. A very famous poet, whom I shall never, ever, ever name, once whispered in my ear, I wish you wouldn't write all these poems about Belgium. My being Belgian. Because I grew up in Belgium, and because I only left Belgium for the United States when I was 46 years old, it holds a big place in my life. And so I decided, as a vengeance, I guess, but a smiling one, to this very famous poet, I'm going to make this a more Belgian reading. All poems about Belgium, about my youth, and also, alas, about my parents. And I'm saying all this before I read, because then I don't have to interrupt everything. I'm also very sadly the daughter of anti-Semites. And because there's a movement growing that breaks my heart, I will also speak about the anti-Semitism that I grew up with and that I didn't understand until one day I understood it. So it's one of my soapboxes is to fight anti-Semitism when I can. But that's for later. Let me start with my first poem, which is called Attic Room in Belgium. I lived and studied and rented a little attic room under mansard roofs. I'll read poems about that. And this is me thinking of that room now, 60 years later of my 20th. So this is called Attic Room in Belgium. Dust covers the window, but light slips through. It always does, through cracks and under doors. Every day at dusk, the sun, through branches, hits a river's bend and sends silver slivers on the walls. No one's there to see this, no one, but it dances there anyway, that light. And when the wind weaves waves into the water, it's as if lit syllables quivered on the bricks. Then the sun sinks, swallowed by the dark. And in that dark, more dust settles and sighs over everything. There is no silence there. Something always stirs, not far away, small rags of noise. Rilke said most people will only know a small corner of their room, I read this long ago and still don't know how to understand that word only. I think of you, love. Search for you in each room that breathes between me and dusk, me and dust. Love, torn corner from this life. The language spoken in Belgium, there are two languages spoken in Belgium, French and Flemish. I'm from the northern side, which is the Flemish side of Belgium. And this is a poem about that language that I love. And as there are no children, I hope, listening, I might translate a whore's song that I will speak about. Loving you in Flemish. Let me love you in my tongue tonight, heavy as percheron hooves on fields lying fallow and humming with rain, their rich and dark loam steaming. I know words lazy as canals gliding among willows and yews, green as memling's velvets or Bruegel's mossy farm roofs. Angry clappers on belfry bronze or moaning tugboat sirens, Flemish undulates like dunes or glistens with the spume of granite piers in Ostend. I know the lingo of blue Antwerp alleys where women learn lust from the sea. They're too hungry for one sailor only. So let me love you with words that are uttered there, only there, words the many-tongued whores whisper. Listen. Kom mee, onze nacht in Antwerpen verdwalen. Mocht de klank van haar lied al lief, amoureus, hadden die geen geld om plezier te betalen. Ik zin een goed vragen, heel net en genereus. Onder de glans van de manen stralen wordt heel onze wereld een huwelijksbed. Kom mee naar bordelen, vol vrouwen en matrozen. Vergeet uw naam en al de rest. That is actually truly a whore's song, because Antwerp was a port between Germany, Spain, Italy, Portugal, France. All the ships went to Antwerp before going to the north. So the whores there, this is no joke, sat in little windows in the blue light district of Antwerp and had little papers in the corner of their window saying, I speak French, I speak Dutch, and I speak whatever, So you would visit the whores who spoke your own language. And the song here says, come with me to spend your night in Antwerp. And if the sounds of the street make your soul longing, although you don't have money to pay for pleasure, I'm a good woman, I'm kind, and I'm generous. And under the gleam of the moon, all our world becomes a wedding bed. Come with me to brothels full of women and sailors and forget your name and all the rest. And that is literally a horse song, and you find them in libraries where people research them. So, my next poem is, I'm looking for my books here. My next poem was page 23. So while I look for the page, I was put in a nunnery when I was almost 4 years old, and I escaped from it when I was 17. I was there year-round, except my parents would pick me for weddings and funerals. They'd come and get me and then dress me up, and then we'd go to the thing, and then they'd dump me back in the nunnery. So most of the first from 4 years old till 17, I was in a nunnery, completely surrounded by walls. So when I escaped, I was one happy girl and one happy person to finally be alone and to be able to go to evening classes and learn things and be free from all that nunnery stuff. There was a room in Antwerp I loved so much that I never filled it with books or a bed or a table. It was alive with its own clarity, and I feared anything left there would etch shadows in that radiance. The room was in the attic of a 100-year-old house, hunched under a mansard roof. All its windows faced the sky. No horizon, no walls, no other windows stared into mine. The wide planked floor had been painted over for more than a century. Scratches in the floor revealed other colors under its white surface. A deep scuff showed a reddish gray. Another scratch showed yellow or green or black. The sun splashed into that room at noon, cascades of light. Dust sucked upward by the heat fluttered under the skylight's chicken wire glass. I'd stretch out my palms to the rays then and grab that light, lie on my back and listen through the layers of whirling air to the city's guttural chatter, the clang of tramways and the melancholic calls of tall ships with their crowns of shrieking gulls. I owned that light, alive, in my hands. And the next is, again, about that room. It's part of a long sequence. I'm just taking a few out of that sequence. The empty room I loved led to a larger one where I lived. On the floor by my bed, askew on a stack of books, stood my small transistor radio. It caught 3 stations, mind you, this is in 63, in Belgium. It caught 3 stations. One was a pirate radio broadcasting from a ship in the North Sea. The other, with Flemish news, only came on 2 hours each night. And the one I listened to most was a classical music station. It played uninterrupted for an hour or more. Then, after a minute or two of absolute silence, a woman's weary voice. She must have been in her late 80s and constantly stumbled on musicians' names. I can still hear her say Rachmaninoff. Every hour, Our Lady's Cathedral chimed while the treble rang the hour, and I'd stand on a chair, lean through a dormer window to watch how Our Lady's steeple pierced the light. Summer of 63, I was free. I was 20. I fell wholly and forever in love every week. I was hungry for life and satiated by it, reading deep into the night, and I copied Sartre, de Beauvoir, Apollinaire, Gide, Rilke, Baudelaire, Senghor, Goethe, Rimbaud, and Lorca in my notebooks, barely sleeping before I rushed down to work, then ran back up the 5 steep flights to that white and lit room. And then a few pages later in that sequence is the last poem I'll read about that room. In 63, still in Antwerp, there were a lot of horse pulled carriages and even tramways. Horse hooves, Flemish jabber, and tugboat hoots ruffle in the air. A Sunday in summer. The skylight is open, and so are the windows. The transistor crackles a piano piece. I sit in the lit room by the door, my back to the white brick wall, and layer by layer, I peel away at the floor paint in a corner of the threshold. Paint petals in my hands. 100 years of lives, 100 keys to this door, 1,000 kisses under the chicken wire skylight of the room, a century of slammed doors, baby cries, women, men, couples moving in, choosing a color for the floor, moving out, leaving scuffs and scars behind. The color gray, I decided, was for a stevedore I knew, who read North Sea clouds better than God, but couldn't read or write. The blue was for a boy thumbing his marbles in the grooves between the planks. The green was for lovers who rushed upstairs, laughing, breathless, and then walked back down silently. But the black paint, the black was for the sirens of May 1940, Hitler's Blitzkrieg, blankets bombing Antwerp, his Luftwaffe ordered to avoid Our Lady by all means. Hitler loved her and he wanted her for his Reich. Then this thin layer, a dusty yellow, for the Jews. It can only be for the Jews, for their yellow armbands under black stars of David. For the Jews cattled to the Breendonk transit camp in Antwerp, sorted, separated, beaten, starved, shot in Breendonk, only 14 miles away from my white and lit room. Now a poem about one of those moments when my parents took me for either a wedding or a funeral, and I remember a little boy there called Jochemke, and he lived in Leek Street in Bruges. Leek Street in Bruges was a cul-de-sac so narrow, cars never scarred its mossy cobblestones. Every house had a niche above the door for a saint and a little garden framed by high brick walls. Carved into the back rampart, an iron gate opened on the wool canal. Now and then a muskrat's head purled out of that green velvet, then slipped back into the water. The belfry rang a bronze quiver through the drizzle every quarter. Jochemke lived at number 8, in the only house with open curtains and no saint above the door. He was 9, had a large hole in his tongue and 6 numbers tattooed on his arm. They did this to him when he was a baby. He said he couldn't remember if it hurt. I loved him so much that I repeated the numbers inside his arm every night until I fell asleep. Jochemke, 743236. It rained the day he said I could put my finger through his tongue. He shut his pale gray eyes and I shut mine, and he slowly closed his lips around my finger. Something guilty and deep made me want to cry. We were setting muskrat traps by the canal the first time he said he loved me. I wanted to play the piano for him or have curly hair and be beautiful. I was so happy. The muskrats were for his father, who made collars and muffs out of them. He sold them at the fish market. He always came back with something for Jochemke. And once it was a glass marble with a heart of green, blue, and gold. And when Jochemke gave it to me, we were sitting by the canal, stirring the algae with willow sticks. His father had told him the heart of the marble was what the world looked like before the Germans. That night, we climbed the belfry tower to make the bronze bell ring with the marble. Up there, looking down at the brown roofs and fields of the world, we wanted to change it back to how it was before the Germans, make it look like the marble again. We'd set traps for the Germans, we'd poke holes in their tongues, we'd hurl their bodies in the canal, and all the muskrats of Bruges would feed on them, and they'd fatten, and then we'd trap them. And I'll buy you a piano, said Jochemke. We'll be the richest muff makers in Belgium. Then, with our marble, we tapped the bell as hard as we could and listened to its small sound float over the canals. So a parenthesis is that Jochemke had been one of the children that had been experimented upon, and they had cut a hole in his tongue when he was an infant to see if he could suckle or not. So that's my poem about Jochemke. And by the way, Jochemke was killed in the 5-day war in Israel a few decades later. Okay, so now I will read to you it's again an excerpt of a much longer poem, but to explain to you how when you're a child, you don't understand how people can be discriminating, and the nuns were discriminating too, and the Jews were bad people. I mean, it was so confusing for a child. So I'll read a short excerpt of this longer poem, but I think it's necessary to read that because of the growing importance of anti-Semitism today in the United States of America. Antwerp, 1949. My parents, hoarding profits from what they call the good war, are happy. 1 million hammers, 10 million nails are needed to rebuild Europe, and my father sells iron and steel. One's misery is another's happiness, he says, as we drive through the Pelican Street and what had been the Jewish quarter. I am 6. 7 decades later, I remember still the winds blew dust and ashes through the empty bellies of the bond houses. Some walls still stood, but for no one. Gutted doors and windows looked like screaming mouths caught in brick, blocks of them, and blocks of them. My father spits out his cigarette. Nothing has changed here, only pigeons and rats instead of Jews. Joden, he says, Joden in Dutch. I don't understand what he says and ask what kind of animals Joden are. My parents laugh and laugh and laugh. To think I spoke their tongue before finding mine. O gods of grief, grant me this. Some tongue must die. Some tongues must die. And I'll finish with something a little more lighthearted, although it is a narrative from me inside the nunnery, but it's fun. I didn't want to end on too sad a note. This is called The Radiator. And I'd like you to know that the radiators in the nunnery were huge. They were about this thick, and they were in wrought iron and very high. The Radiator. Winters in Bruges were a monochrome of brown and gray, as were the huge wrought iron radiators in the nunnery. I believe the banging north winds came to die in those pipes. I was 8 then, ugly, awkward, shy. Nuns slid along granite halls, their hands in black tunnels of serge. Soon dawn would cast its light through the stained glass of the chancel. I longed for that moment when the hyacinth cape of the Virgin bloomed and the cheeks of Jesus blushed as if from a sinful dream. My uniform itched. Knitted socks stopped an inch under the knee and flannel skirts half an inch above. And my thighs were chapped from rubbing on benches and stiff sheets. At 5:45 a.m., we stood at the chapel doors in shivering rows of 3. I was cold, always cold during those interminable Catholic winters. Mother Marguerite was late that day, and the radiator banged next to me, so I lifted my skirt, jumped, and straddled it, raw thighs against the lukewarm metal. Annabelle pointed to me. "I'll tell on you." Judith whispered, "You'll be punished." The door opened, and I froze. Like a mad magpie, Mother Superior's cornet flapped in my face. "Get off there," she said, "immediately." "Forgive me, Mother," I dared, "but why?" Her knotted fingers were ice on my wrist. "It gives ideas," she said. I didn't look at the Virgin's cape that day, or at Jesus blushing. I couldn't figure out what Mother Superior meant. Years later, in the back of a black Peugeot, I understood. It was forbidden, it was hard, and it was warm. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Laure-Anne, for such a great evocation of your upbringing and its landscape. It's so human and loving and poignant, eloquent, and it makes me think that, or ask a question not to be answered, but just a rhetorical question: are all poems in our time elegiac? But thank you so much, and you're such a marvelous reader and writer of poetry, or just tantamount. It just.
Thank you.
It was so incredible and such an important subject matter.
It is, alas.
So thank you.
Thank you very, very much, and I can't wait to hear you, Bart.
Thank you, Laure-Anne Bosselaar. Bart Edelman's poetry collections include Crossing the Hackensack, Under Damaris's Dress, The Alphabet of Love, The Gentleman, The Last Mojito, The Geographer's Wife, Whistling to Trick the Wind, and This Body is Never at Rest, New and Selected Poems, 1993, 2023, forthcoming from Meadowlark Press. He has taught at Glendale College, where he edited Eclipse, a literary journal, and most recently in the MFA program at Antioch University, LA. His work has been widely anthologized in textbooks published by City Lights Books, Harcourt Brace, Longman, McGraw-Hill, Prentice Hall, Simon & Schuster, the University of Iowa Press, and others. He lives in Pasadena, California. Bart Edelman's poetry is empathetic, loving, elegiac, personal, and yet it has an awareness of the larger world. Here's a superlative poet, Bart Edelman.
Thank you very much, Harry. It is a pleasure to be with you. Thanks, Jennifer. And the real pleasure is reading, of course, with Laure-Anne. I've got a surprise or two, I think, for you, Laure-Anne. Just something to whet your appetite. Also, as Harry said, thanks to Meadowlark Press, to Tracy and Lindsay for the upcoming collection. This Body Is Never at Rest, poems from 1993 to 2023. I'd like to begin with the title poem from that collection and ask the question, is a body ever truly at rest? This body is never at rest. This body is never at rest for reasons I now suspect, for what it may portend, for where the next breath leads, for steps of jubilant agony. This body is never at rest, although it yearns for repair, although an avalanche awaits, although the Holy Spirit is asleep, although the universe cries foul. This body is never at rest, despite forgetting its last name, despite working round the clock, despite a simple state of decency, despite the hatchet in its back pocket. This body is never at rest, hence the clarion call to arms, hence a thought in a glass bottle, hence each muscle at mid-twitch, hence no date of expiration. This body is never at rest because the morning is an uncoiled string, because the afternoon pays no taxes, because the evening needs a shadow, because this body says so. Oftentimes in childhood, we are closest to our pets rather than the folks around us. Those poignant memories never quite seem to leave us. This poem was published in the Marking Heart Review. It's called Erasmus. You had to know Erasmus to get the get of him, my mother would often say. He was an old, large black dog by the time I came along, what with 3 older brothers who chased him unmercifully through the plentiful thickets surrounding our house outside the swamps, comprising Teaneck at that time. I think when he saw me, he realized he was happily in for a rather easy time of it and would lie for hours at my feet, dreaming of other dogs or whatnot. While my questionable social disorder or any number of other maladies limited my close friendships, Erasmus constantly tailed me as if I were king of the universe. It was only in his untimely passing he chased a car that stopped when he made contact with it. I felt grief for the first time and deeply languished in it for what seemed to be an eternity. Now I still desire unconditional love, but the mere thought of Erasmus barking to his heart's content brings me such utter joy I can barely contain myself. My wife and I spend a great deal of time in Paso Robles and in Cambria here in California. We drive up the 5 north and take Route 46 across the valley. We often pass the beautiful glass monument that was done by a Japanese sculptor to memorialize James Dean, who perished in a terrible car accident in 1955, right along that road that we take. Perhaps no other actor commanded as much respect as he did in such a short period of time. Certainly, he was famous for the 3 movies that he appeared in: Giant, East of Eden, Rebel Without a Cause. And so this was published in the Hobo Camp Review. It's for James Dean. It's called James So Dean. Head so heavy, heart so bold, Ford so Chevy, soul so cold. Eyes so blue, feet so wide, giant so true, tongue so tied. Smile so nice, voice so shy, once so twice, low so high. Porsche so clean, road so slick, James so Dean, death so quick. All right, Laure-Anne. I think you know what may be coming up here.
Thank you.
This is a poem that I didn't read the last time we did our session, but I remember saying last October from New York that I would certainly read this. This is Juanita Miranda Montana. Juanita Miranda Montana. If the truth be told, I wanted to marry you the moment we met, simply for your name alone. The way it managed to roll so pleasingly off my tongue when first I pronounced it. Juanita Miranda Montana. I dream of beginning each day, asking how you passed the night, serving you breakfast in bed, a scone, an orange, a coffee, anything to make your journey through this complicated world a breath of undeniable ease. Juanita Miranda Montana. If you were my wife, I would never request you change a name so filled with song, I could sing it forever, trilling from season to season, knowing you would be listening until we are no more. We all have weekly rituals that we do. Sometimes when you do these, you find unexpected items around you. Perhaps, as in this case, you find a raven. This is called a raven. Today, sorting laundry, I found a dazed raven half asleep in my pocket. Poor thing appeared haggard, told me he hadn't enjoyed a moment's rest in ages. It surely seemed the case. The bird recited metric verse the entire afternoon, claimed he was a union member, but then it all went to snot. Now he was disenfranchised, out of work, out of money, and still had hungry mouths left to feed in a nest somewhere south of Baltimore. It made me weep, I'll admit. However, late for supper, I placed him gently in the dryer, set the cycle to permanent press, wished him all the best, got on with my life. This poem, Pacific Surfliner, was published in Slab. A little bit more California travel. This time, the splendid Pacific Surfliner, a boy's dream, the never-ending journey towards, I guess, what we would call hope. Pacific Surfliner. The train was always traveling, but it never stopped for us. We watched the Pacific Surfliner as it wound its way due north to Oxnard, Ventura, and Santa Barbara, leaving us in the lurch. One day, one day, one day, we whispered repeatedly, longingly, waiting for tomorrow to board the ride of our dreams. We listened to the iconic horn, tempting us far and away. We got a glimpse of freedom from the banks, drawing closer and closer, gliding smoothly down the track. It was all we could do to keep from flinging ourselves, frenzy-like, smack dab towards the locomotive. Along the rails path we sped, chasing a non-existent ticket we were forced to purchase. The very notion of escape, impractical, improbable, impossible. Only in the cab car's waning shadow did we suppose a time might arrive when we were worthy enough to hear the conductor welcome us aboard, announce each scheduled destination, one future route after another. I think a lot about traps, how we set them, construct them consciously or not. Some people even make their living in the craft of constructing traps. This next poem is called The Lobster Man. The lobster man has few qualms concerning the state of his life. He knows the lethal trap his wife has set for him. How ironic it all seems. Like his father before him and his grandfather as well, he's long accepted this chosen trade, work from which he does not shirk. Early each morning his day begins. He prepares the wooden pots, carefully maintaining them to allow the maximum capacity possible. As he breaks away from shore, he sings the song he was taught. A lobster, a lobster, a lobster I must be, if not for the hope of tomorrow, if not for the love of the sea. Late afternoon exhaustion arrives. He checks the crates and hopes there is enough of a haul to make it worth his while. When he finally reaches home, she has dinner ready for him, but is fast asleep in the bed they share through loneliness. He eats by silent candlelight, awaiting his remaining fate. Waiting, waiting, waiting. Waiting patiently. Tom Petty tells us the waiting is the hardest part. True. Leonard Cohen writes, we're always waiting for the miracle. And Samuel Beckett, bless his Irish soul, has his folks waiting for Godot. Here's my take on Godot, but a little bit different. Someone like Godot. I too have been waiting for someone like Godot, or a fellow who looks similar, despite my lack of awareness concerning who he must really be. Listen, it just appears obvious, if you're taking your chances, to err on Providence's side until you know any better. And even then, I imagine it could be too late to change what is your ultimate fate, wherever direction you're headed. Perhaps it's the aimless who succeed. Without a rudder in the water, they cast no net to speak of, relying only upon a vision, a whim, if you will. Simply put, the choice one makes when nothing certain remains. It's a good a place to start, a good a place to hang the oversized hat you wear, keeping the rain at bay. Yes, I'll place my money on Godot. He seems rather harmless and ready for the task at hand. This next poem is, geez, my God, it's another one for Laure-Anne. And I see Harry in this poem too somewhere. And wonder if each of us has a song that we identify with, that we sing. This is the song. Once she sang the song, her singing never stopped. It wafted through the streets, behind Marie's pastry shop, inside Pascal Renoir's haberdashery, above St. Christopher's Church, and out across the canal where lovers chose to boat. It was an unforgettable tune you could not relinquish as long as you retained breath. The simple melody and verse came to visit when you needed a respite from the dreary day, or a private interlude at night, often before drinking pastis, alone in a neighborhood cafe on the side of the boulevard you always felt most comfortable. Long ago, you wisely decided the song should be played at a funeral, especially yours. The thought brings a smile every time you propose it, an overture perhaps to a life you wish you lived and did. House is home. Home is house. There are electric connections inside and out, which seems to connect all of us as we pass the days. What flows through your house? This is fuse. Like the rest of us, it's often inclined to trip every now and then when the circuits overload and the current's flow has nowhere else to go. A simple fix, of course, demands we reset the breaker or replace the broken fuse. Might it ever come to that? I imagine I'd be better set if this were my only fate, powering off and back on again at so much as a moment's notice. Let destiny grind to a halt because of a bad connection hidden somewhere in the system, undiagnosed until I've reached what limited charge remains. Perhaps I'm on a slow decline, losing juice without realizing it. Should I open up one day to a more thorough examination, who knows what an electrician may find? For now, though, I'm humming along, rock steady and ready, not even a surge in mind. Yet I sense at any time I could blow sky high and burn this old house down. I have two more. Hope that's okay. Two more to read. This next one is called The Last Word. I dwell sometimes on what I think the last word might be. Is it literal? Is it symbolic? Where it might take us. And this poem is the last poem in the new section of poems, and this body is never at rest. The last word. I think of the last word, when it will be written, how it may possibly sound, what the meaning shall convey, and I wonder, perchance, if I can measure its weight by the length of a feather yesterday's sparrow left behind on the path to my loft in this house I call home. I ponder what time remains, troubling me now and then, yet I know not to stop, for fear I'll be unable to start the process again. Distinguish winter from spring, turn summer towards fall. Just the sort of mutation I sense could haunt me in doubt's final moments. Archbishop Anthony Bloom concedes the proper response to love is to accept it. There is nothing to do. So too must it follow. This slow work I practice, painstaking in its every letter, a crawl towards the light I find in a dark corner, just waiting to address the night. And the last poem I want to read is a poem called In Heaven. Outside of the last word, perhaps, maybe there could be something beyond. A place, a sanctuary, who knows? In heaven. In heaven, they know your work. Catalog every poem you've written. Commit them to memory forevermore. Bradbury and you huddle together over a steaming cup of Java, discussing relevant issues each morning, giggling until the afternoon releases you to destiny's retreat. How sublime are the clouds buttoning up the universe below, telling you it's all been worth the journey to reach the celestial home you'll never need leave again. Tomorrow, Twain shall come calling. He enjoys his billiards and bourbon, not necessarily in that order. Frost will soon follow next week, partial to easy wind and downy flake, arriving atop his splendid little horse. Bob's always good for a serious chat, no longer rushed by daily matters, nary a promise to keep. It's a jolly good life here indeed. You can still write now and then when thoughts sneak up on you like visits from long lost friends. Thank you, my friends.
Thank you very much, Bart. You measure your journey of love, death, existentialism, movie acting, travel, with such eloquence, and you have such erudition and vulnerability. I mean, both of you really have such an understanding, a tragic understanding of what life really is about. Robert Graves said the two subject matters of poetry are one, life and death, and two, the triple-headed goddess. And yet you both have the ability, dealing with these subject matters, to be uplifting. And I think it's because the writing is so precise and honest, and you allow the truth in your lives to come forth. So we have like 3 or 4 minutes left. Why don't each one of you just say, half a minute or so about each other's work? It's such a lovely, important reading we've had here today. Bart, why don't you say something about Laure-Anne and then vice versa?
I would love to. Laure-Anne's work always makes me feel as if I'm kind of right in the palm of her hand. She has such a tenderness to her work. Obviously, these poems today that I heard, obviously I could relate to them with my background and just feel a certain amount of anguish that she has felt in terms of her background. And I just laud her honesty. It's one thing to be honest. It's another thing to be able to do that magically through her work and be able to tell such a poignant story, and to do it in verse and to touch so many other people around her, which she's done in all the work that.
Bart, when you go between where you live and Cambria, if you don't stop by Santa Barbara, you and your wife, and let me make you a cup of tea and give you some cookies, that would be lovely. And your poetry, in my opinion, I never feel excluded in your poems. And there are so many poems that I love, that I admire, that I wish I could write as well, but where I don't feel included. I don't feel that you always address me. I know that I'm in, and that for me is why I have these, 10, 15 poets that I love that are always on that side of my desk and that I can always reach out to because I know they include me, the reader, right? You share your aloneness that is never loneliness. It's very strange. It's a voice of a man alone who speaks to the world, but there is always a stretched out hand. Like, are you there? Do you see what I mean? Do you understand what I'm trying to say? And your language has a cadence that is very clear. There, you have a cadence, very often iambic or trochaic, and you hear it, but it's not forced. So that's something that I admire a whole lot. And that you read that Miranda poem for me, that it really touched me. And I think I'll never buy canaries again, but if I buy a dog, maybe I'll call her that way. So thank you for your words, and thank you for Harry for allowing us to read again together. That was a privilege. That was a present right there.
Yeah, that was wonderful. Thank you so much, Harry.
It's our pleasure, and thank you both for such a magnificent reading. Next Tuesday, two terrific poets, Moria Simon and Perry James, will read here today. So thank you once again for a marvelous reading, Laure-Anne Bosselaar and Bart Edelman.